Today, you're going to learn something that whether you love it or hate it, I guarantee you need to get better at it. And that, my friend, is business small talk. Whether you're in a leadership position or you just do a lot of work with Americans, there is an art to the business small talk. And today, you're going to get so much better at it. The most important thing we're going to talk about today is how to adapt to the cultural differences. Whatever you think about small talk, it's going to be different in your native language than it is for Americans. So, I'm going to give you some actionable tips that will help you be able to connect genuinely and have the kind of small talk that leads to career growth. For those of you who don't know me yet, my name is Tanya Suarez, and I'm a communication coach. I specialize in helping professionals who are non native speakers communicate effectively and lead confidently. And of course, as always, remember to go to tanyasuarez.com/lead to download your free audio training, where you'll get to know the 3 essentials of American leadership communication. Now, circling back to small talk, bottom line. The bottom line, what are the benefits? Because at this point in your career, you don't need to work on anything that's not going to help your career. So the benefits are it gets awkwardness out of the way. If you just jump into whatever the topic of the meeting is or whatever's on your mind, it's going to be perceived as awkward. You might think maybe you're from a culture that's super direct. Unfortunately, that's not going to translate as direct. That's going to translate as awkward, maybe insensitive, maybe kind of off putting. So you want to make sure that you don't start with awkwardness. If you're from a culture that talks a lot, I'm thinking about you, Brazil, then this is going to help you have more concise small talk so that you don't start with the awkwardness of oversharing. There's a balance. The other benefit is you get to make genuine connections. The biggest criticism I see with the people that I coach is that usually they don't love small talk, and especially American small talk, because the perception is Americans are really superficial. I don't understand why they talk about the weather so much, and they don't see a benefit. However, when you understand the cultural reasons of why and how we do small talk, and you use strategies that make the small talk more effective, you're going to start loving it because it allows you to make genuine connections very quickly. If you just do the superficial back and forth of like, how's the weather? Da, 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 then sure, I can see why maybe you don't love it. However, with the strategies you're going to learn today, we're going to take that and we're going to use that to create connections that will then allow you to learn information and use that for future small talk. So it's not always the same superficial stuff. You'll be able to go deeper with people, but in a way that is culturally acceptable, comfortable, because at the end of the day, you do want to make the other person comfortable. And when you're in a leadership position, you are in the position to set that safe environment, to create an interaction where people can open up to you. Now, the good topic. So, we're going to talk about what's appropriate and what's inappropriate for American small talk. Honestly, if it's Friday or Monday, the first question you're going to ask is about the weekend. So, there's a little bit of a schedule you can follow so that you don't feel overwhelmed. So, if it's Friday, you can always ask, oh, do you have any plans this weekend? If it's Monday, you can ask, how was your weekend? If it's the middle of the week, you can say, how's your week going so far? How was your week? Maybe if it's Thursday, after you ask about the weekend on Friday, oh, and how was your week this week? Grammatically, pretty basic. And in terms of the schedule, pretty simple. Now, the thing you want to accept here, and I was just talking to a client, he works at AWS, and we're talking about how difficult it was for him to, from Brazil, when he moved to the US, to get used to the fact that Americans say everything is good or great. And I get it. It can seem disingenuous. It can seem like, no, your life can't be great all the time. That's not what we mean. It's just a simple way to get through small talk. Once you're closer with someone, once you have a trusted friendship or work relationship, then they can open up and say, actually, I'm not feeling so great. But we don't do that at the beginning. So if you're coming from a culture that's very open, I want you to resist oversharing personal things at the beginning. And it's not because we're not lying when we say things are great. It's just how we answer everything. How's your day? Great, good, good. And then we walk off. And that can be annoying. But once you realize we don't take it personally, it's just the rhythm that we have, you're able to accept it. And from a non native speaker perspective, this is less pressure for you. You don't have to create all these complicated responses when someone says, how's your day? Good, thanks. How's yours? Simple. But you want to do it in a way that's genuine. So the thing is, if you tend to, in your culture, really be open about how you are. If someone says, how's your day going? And you're like, oh, it's terrible. I mean, my back's been hurting and my mom did that. Da, da, da. That might be appropriate for your culture, but it doesn't translate well. If you do that in English, the problem is you will be perceived as an oversharer or a complainer. And what that does is it doesn't establish trust. Someone who overshares immediately usually will kind of a red flag, like, oh, if they talk this much, maybe they're talking about me behind my back or something. It's just uncomfortable. And you might think you're being honest, but from American culture perspective, you might be perceived as a complainer. And you don't want to start off a meeting with that kind of negative energy. So, how was your day? Good, thanks. If you want to add a little bit of what you consider to be honest, keep it simple. Oh, it's really busy, but good. Thanks. How about you? How's your week going? So you can add a little bit, but notice it's very, very concise. Now, the other thing Americans love to talk about is the weather. Now, the interesting part here, because the US is so big, when you have virtual meetings or meetings with people from different cities, this could be interesting. Like it's at the same time of year, it's super hot in the south and super cold in the north, whatever. Even if you're not super excited to talk about the weather, again, think about it as look, Americans, we're so formulaic and we're like little corporate robots that smile a lot. So there are certain things that just think about it as making people comfortable. You get this kind of basic standardized small talk to start things to warm up, and then you can get into the things that are really important. And it's really ineffective if you're about to go and pitch a multi-million dollar deal or merger or whatever the meeting is about, and you skip the small talk. You're not going to establish the trust and the energy that you need to close the deal or to have a more effective business conversation. Just like when you're doing business with other cultures, if they're the one that you need to connect with, you need to learn how they communicate. But now that you're working, especially in the globalization that we're experiencing, the standard does default to American culture a lot. So it'll really give you a good competitive edge and help you reach the goals that you have. Industry news and current events, I would recommend stick to the positive. Don't talk about negative industry news because remember, we're not talking about deep conversations with coworkers or colleagues or peers. We're talking about small talk. And you want to establish it's not about being happy all the time, but if you're always talking about negative things, you're going to be perceived as a negative person. So it's not that you have to be super smiley and happy joy all the time, but there is an expectation of neutrality or positivity that will help you do small talk that creates a more productive foundation for conversation. And interests. Now, this one, for the interests, I recommend share and don't just ask. So with American conversation, I find that you kind of set the standard for what you want the answer to be. So if you share, then you show them what you're expecting in return. And so what I mean by this, and it sounds more complicated than it is, but again, you understanding the strategy will help you be more effective. Instead of just saying, what do you like to watch? What movies do you like? That's okay, but that also feels like either super basic English wise or robotic and unfriendly conversation wise. Instead, I want you to share about yourself and then ask. For example, if you're talking about the weekend, you could say, oh, I spent all Sunday watching Top Chef. I love reality shows. What about you? Do you watch any reality competition shows? So then you've shared of yourself concisely, and then you've asked them. So what this does is if they like the same thing that you're talking about, your interest, that's going to be awesome because then you know that about them And then you're able to refer back to that in other conversations. If they don't, it's okay. You didn't spend 5 minutes talking about reality competition shows. It was concise. So if you're like, no, I don't really watch reality shows. Okay, then you can move the conversation forward. Oh, okay. What do you like to watch? And then they might share something that maybe the shows they do watch you also enjoy, maybe not. So if you don't, then you can, again, this is where you practice and say, oh, okay, I have never watched that one. I'll have to check it out. Don't ask so many follow-up questions like, what's that show about? Tell me all about it. Because this is for business small talk. We're usually talking about a few minutes before a meeting starts. You don't want to start an in-depth conversation about an unrelated topic and then you have to cut it off abruptly and start the meeting. So it's also about making sure the amount of things you talk about are concise, easy to cut off, and easy to move on, but they're still very insightful. And something here I recommend when someone talks about interests, and I do this personally, and it's what I coach, write it down. Don't do it in the moment because then that's awkward of like, let me write down what you just said, but kind of try to store it away or subtly, if you're typing notes or something during the meeting, type it up. So if Jane mentions that she really likes the podcast Diary of a CEO, write it down because then what you can do is check it out later. Maybe go Google it, go listen to an episode, and then imagine that connection. And you're then, let's say that you're the CEO and that person is the director of one of the departments. You're walking around the company with them the following day, the next week, and you say, hey, you know what? I checked out that podcast that you talked about, and I really enjoyed the episode with when he interviewed whoever. From a leadership perspective, can you imagine if someone, you're like, wow, not only did she listen to what I was saying, she looked into something that was important to me. You don't have to listen to the whole episode, but just the effort, the connection that that makes as a leader, you're increasing trust, you're increasing connection that when things get tough, all the positive small connections that you've made make a big difference. And that's really what I try to help you as a leader who's a non-native speaker. It's not just about, I don't feel like talking about the weather. I don't really get what Americans are talking about. Like they all say the same thing before every meeting. Yes, we do. But that makes it easier for you to understand it. And then with the right strategy and coaching, you elevate it. The kinds of connections you can make when you take those notes and follow up. If someone mentions that their kid plays baseball, you can ask about that. Like, oh, I remember you mentioned your son plays baseball. Did he have any games this week? You're like, wow, this person really listened. So you don't have to remember everything. I take notes. I write down when people say they're interested in things. And then if I have time, I'll go find something to share. And if not, at least I remember it and then I can bring it up again later. So these are genuine connections. It's worth the effort. Just because it's basic doesn't mean it's simple or easy. Now, the bad topics. These are things that, again, this is where the cultural differences come into play. It's not that they're bad, they're just bad for American small talk. So engaging in things about politics or religion, those tend to be at the top of kind of the controversial. There is a way to talk about those topics, of course, when you have established a connection, when you have a friendship. But we're talking about professional relationships and professional conversations. So that's where the difference is. It's not that we can never talk about these things, it's that business small talk is not the place. Now, I mentioned family. And the reason I want to bring this up is because it's not that talking about your family is bad. It's that the strategy here is that I recommend, or what I coach is, don't talk about family unless they bring it up first. So I never ask people, do you have any children? For example, I wait. If they say, again, let's say you're talking about the weekend, like, oh, I took my kids for ice cream. Oh, you have kids? How many? So when it comes to family information, and that includes relationships, I never ask people, are you married? Are you dating anyone? If they bring it up, if they say like, oh, my boyfriend and I, or my wife and I, then you can ask, oh, you're married. How long have you been married? Let them tell you what's appropriate to ask when it comes to family stuff. Now, the reason is because when it comes to, for example, children and family, you don't know someone's fertility journey. You don't know what that might trigger. Maybe they don't have kids, but they want kids and can't have them physically. You just don't know. There's so many sensitive things that can happen, and business small talk is not the place. A close friendship, sure, but that's not what you're training. So the rule of thumb here is if they bring something up, then they have given you permission to ask. Otherwise, don't talk about it. Don't ask about it. Ask about the weather instead. Now, appearance. You probably don't mean to do this in a negative way. And I'll be completely blunt with you. I'm mostly talking to men here. Just don't. Don't mention, and I know you think like you want to compliment maybe like a necklace or glasses or something. Eh, that might be the only thing, but even then, I recommend don't. Not for small talk. There are so many ways that if the tone is not appropriate, it could be misconstrued. If you say like, "Oh, are you sick? You look tired." Maybe the person just didn't wear makeup that day. Just don't. So the rule of thumb here is don't comment on people's appearance, about how they look. Don't ask if they're sick. If it's the same as family, if they say they're sick, then you can bring it up. I would say don't comment on hair or outfits or anything. If it's a colleague that you're already friendly with, then maybe you can say, "Oh, I love your new glasses," or like, "Oh, I like the way you did your hair today." If it's the first time you're meeting someone, completely stay away from these. It's better to be safe than sorry. And personal information, this is kind of what I mentioned about the health. Like, "Oh, you look sick. Are you okay?" Don't don't ask about that. When it comes to this, also ties back to the family aspect, relationships. Sometimes people don't feel comfortable sharing. It could be cultural. Certain cultures treat people who've been divorced differently. Or, for example, I've experienced this because I'm married to a woman. I don't like to talk about that until I know it's a safe space. So you let the person bring it up first. So don't ask about personal. And again, we're not talking about deep friendship conversations. We're talking about business small talk. You want people to feel comfortable. You want people to have good energy before you enter into the meeting or the business component of it. All right, and strategy. So here are a few things you can do to be better. Because again, it is basic in terms of English, but at this level where you are in your career, it's about the strategy that you implement so that you can be a better communicator. You can have better relationships at work, which small talk can lead to promotions. Small talk can lead to closing the deal. So if you need any other motivation, that's a really great one. A lot of times promotions are about likability, about connections more so than merit. And you probably have the merit, but you also need the social component. All right, so here, prepare. It is not that much. You don't need a list of 20 questions. You just need to prepare 3 and then practice it. I'm going to skip all the way to the end. Don't just prepare like, okay, I know I need to ask about the weekend. Actually do it. Record yourself. Look in the mirror. Actually say, "How was your weekend? How was your weekend? Hey, so how was your weekend?" Say it over and over again so that you can train the muscle. A lot of the English is in your brain. And then when you try to say it, the body doesn't react the way you think it will. So actually move it. Second strategy is be curious. So part of effective small talk, especially at the higher levels, I want you to be more into listening and being curious about what you hear. So for example, if someone mentions that they took their kids out for ice cream on the weekend, don't just skip over that. Really take a moment, really listen to what they're saying. Like, oh, great. How many kids do you have? Because if people share personal information, which is already something kind of special during small talk, and you just skip it, it's going to be perceived as that person is not genuinely engaged. They don't really care about me. It's just not a great vibe. It's a small thing you can do that has a really great impact. So be curious in a respectful way, of course. So don't be curious and ask things that have not been presented. It's the strategy, right? If they open up about a topic, then I find that that's a green light that you can ask a little bit more. Don't rush. Breathe. So much of the training that I do with my leaders is breath work because the way that you breathe really impacts your fluency, your delivery. If you're just like, "How was your weekend?" "Good." "Okay, great. And how's your week going?" It's going to feel robotic and again disingenuous. My belief, the way that I coach, is I want authenticity and genuine curiosity, genuine connections. It's not just about playing a game. It's about how to be yourself and how to bring out the best in people. When you're rushing through your contributions to the conversation, it's not going to create the connection that you need. It's wasted small talk. In fact, it can hurt you more than it helps you. So the tiny thing you can do there is breathe before you answer. So instead of, "How was your weekend?" "Good." "How was yours?" "How was your weekend?" "It was pretty good." Yeah, it was relaxing. How was yours? So just by breathing, it also lets your brain be more creative, add those tiny, like 1 or 2 words that make a response feel open instead of just the formula, the basics. Also, breathe while other people are talking. So what happens with small talk is you're already more likely than not, your heart rate is accelerated because you're already in this situation, in this meeting. That's gonna make you feel a little bit of anxiety. That's going to your body's gonna think something's happening that's major when really you're prepared for this, right? So the more you breathe, you decrease the heart rate, you decrease the anxiety, you're able to listen. You can't actively listen if you're not breathing and you're just thinking about what to say next. The more you prepare beforehand, the more you're able to listen actively, which means the more you'll be able to be curious. So it's a beautiful, positive, vicious cycle. And with the right preparation and training, you don't have to train intensely for the rest of your life. Really, with a few weeks of, and I do mean weeks, not just hours, of really preparing for small talk, you're creating a skill that's going to help you for the rest of your career. It's worth it. Now, here, almost last but not least, relax. Something that I do with my clients is I have them record themselves during meetings and send me the recording. And then I watch it either with them or with them and by myself, put it on mute. Just look at yourself. And you can observe yourself during the small talk portion. Since so many of our meetings are virtual, this is great because you get the data that you need. Put it on mute, look at yourself. If you're like this, if you're like this, that's not relaxed body language. Even if you're still a little bit insecure about your English, your body language, your relaxed body language is going to help you so much. You will look confident even if you don't feel confident yet. So really take a look at how you sit. Are your arms crossed? Like really relax. And look, that might be a defense mechanism. So if you need to, write it on a post-it note. Breathe, relax, smile. You might think like, yeah, these are obvious things to do, but in the moment, I have trained enough people to know that in the moment, all of that goes away and survival kicks in. So until you're really feeling good about it, write the obvious. Remind yourself of the obvious. Now, if you're not, to go back to the smiling component, Americans are really smiley. And I know that that can be uncomfortable for certain cultures. So if you're from a culture that you just, smiling is not part of your, or maybe your personality, at least relax your shoulders and relax your face and sit up. That's at least going to look a little bit more relaxed and engaged. If you can, smile a little bit during the small talk portion just to set the foundation of you being personable. Because look, you're not in a leadership position because you don't get into these positions without having personality, without having some sense of social skills, because leadership is a lot about the soft skills. So as you're working to translate them to be more compatible with American corporate culture, smiling a little bit just during the small talk, and then you can go back to your serious or more natural face throughout the rest of the meeting, but at least you've made the impression. You're setting up the energy and interaction that's going to help you be more productive during the business component of it. And last thing is practice. Practice, practice, practice. It is not difficult in terms of the grammar. At this point, what you're working on is the comfort, the delivery, the intonation, and you want to practice. Um, you know what? I'll put together a list of what I think are some of the best questions for small talk. And again, we're going to be concise. You're not training a lot, but you also are thinking, all right, what do people like to talk about, especially if you know your team? You can kind of skip ahead a little bit. Sure, talk about the weather and whatnot, but if you already know your team or your client, do some research. Go look at what their interests are. We share so much of our personal life online that you might easily be able to find out that they're a fan of a certain sport, for example. You don't have to say, "Hey, I saw you posted a picture of you at the Super Bowl 2 weeks ago on your Instagram." That's going to come across as you being a stalker. Instead, casually say, "Oh, did you watch the Super Bowl? Oh, you're from New Orleans. Are you a fan of the Saints?" Even if you don't know about the NFL, that tiny bit of research, it'll get them to relax, it'll show some commonality, and then you prepare the follow-up. They're going to ask, "Oh, do you like the Saints?" Prepare for it. If you do, great, that makes it easier. Like, yeah, I really like, watching them. Or no, I'm actually a fan of another team, but I think the Saints are great. Or I'm from New Orleans, that's why I keep saying Saints. Or you could say prepare, like, you know what? No, I don't really watch a lot of NFL. I'm more into, I don't know, volleyball. Or no, you know what? Actually, I don't watch a lot of sports. And then you figure out, you prepare what the follow-up is. Are you going to stay on the sports topic? Or are you going to practice to navigate the conversation to a different topic or a different interest? So this is where it's the next level training. It's not just the basic questions. You also want to practice and prepare what the follow-up questions are and how you're going to navigate the conversation. You don't want to go too deep because, again, the small talk is usually going to be before a meeting or if you're at a conference, like networking. So people are going to be moving. You're going to have something else to do. So you want to keep it interesting, simple enough that it can be cut off so you can move on to the next item or the next event, but effective enough that you make a genuine connection. And I'm telling you, when you do this and follow these strategies, the connections that you make, the conversations that you have, the reputation that you build, it is so easy to be caring as a leader. And you need to, because you're going to make tough decisions at some point. You're going to have to give bad news at some point. You're not always going to have positive news to share. So the more you have these positive interactions, it's going to make the negative also easier. And you're going to feel a lot more confident and comfortable. All right, thank you so much for joining me for today's leadership English tips. And if you'd like to apply for my leadership communication program and get in-depth training, check it out at tanyasuarez.com/leadership. And remember, practice makes progress. We are not seeking perfection at this level of English, at this level of your career. It's always about evolving to become a better version of yourself. And you're not alone. I'm here with you, and I'll see you next time for some more tips.